Right, we've reached this part of the show where we're going to continue the interview with the DJ known as Dave Lee, better known by his DJ name as Jerry Negro all around the world, from Essex, England, and probably one of England's top DJs for the last 30 years. And I've got part 2, because part 1 was last week, so I did promise part 2 would be this week. So without any further ado, let's get into it again. And this is part 2 of the interview with Dave Lee from Essex. The year is 2012, done by Tony Prince. He's interviewing from DMC. Okay, so here we go.
So I used to listen to the radio a lot, people like Robbie Vincent and anything I could tape, because once I had this FM music centre, I could actually tape off the radio. So I used to like listening to Tony Monson on Essex Radio, and then James Hamilton's column. I used to read about the things and you'd maybe hear them on the radio that weekend, and I think maybe that's why I've always, with my productions, always wanted things that sound good on the radio as well as sounding good in a club, because I think it's there's some records which are great club records but aren't great radio records, and I think the best records, I think, are good on both, but it wasn't until probably I came up to London that I started probably going out more and meeting more people who are like-minded musically. I used to go to like High and Hope in Dingwalls, where it used to be Norman Jay and Frankie Fonsett, and quite a lot of one-off events, and they'd be all over, like in the Rare Groove era. You go somewhere, there used to be that club, The Brain, I used to go to sometimes as well, which was in Soho. But other places in Kensington, I can't even remember what they were called, but they were just one-off, like places you go and it would just be 70s funk and Rare Groove. Norman Jay sometimes as well at the Bass Clef which is in Hoxton Square, and Hoxton was like the middle of nowhere then. It was all just warehouses and whatever. So I wasn't as much someone who was like a real out-and-out clubber, though. I wasn't someone who was going out like all weekend, going out on a Friday night, not coming home till a Sunday, afternoon or whatever. But I mean, I went to the Hacienda quite a few times in that late 80s era, because we had brought over Blaze and other acts, so we would travel around, so that was a good way of seeing what was going on, in different places. And, because you can get if you live in London and go out to London clubs, you can get quite London-centric with your attitude. So it's interesting going outside London and seeing that sort of like what you thought was a massive record actually isn't really that popular out in reality, So I've always tried to, remember that sort of like in the same way as HMV Oxford Street isn't typical of HMVs in the rest of the country, So it's we're spoiled in lots of ways here. I guess during the 80s I DJ'd probably about 20 times between 1980 and 1990. I was someone who had a large record collection. I loved music, and I was buying records, and I wanted to be a DJ. But being a DJ back then, it wasn't easy to get into just go to a club and say, "Oh, do you want me to DJ for you?" I tried that. I remember trying to put on my own night at this local club, and it didn't really work. And I DJ'd at a few parties, and I've DJ'd at friends' events and whatever, but it wasn't really going anywhere. And when I moved to London, then I managed to DJ a little bit more, playing Rare Groove and, some early house, played on pirate radio a few times. But I wasn't really becoming a household name. It wasn't until I started making music that I started getting offered gigs, and then all of a sudden I was getting offered like pretty high profile gigs because I had records out that were successful. So, and I think that's increasingly become the way that DJs establish themselves nowadays. I think it's quite hard to just become a well-known DJ just on the back of being a DJ. I think you need that advert of a record. So it was in the early 90s that I started DJing more seriously, or actually getting paid for it, I suppose, because I'd had records out and people had heard of me. So I think, that's when a promoter feels confident putting your name on a flyer, and you think, well, people have heard of this guy. Whereas you can be an absolutely incredible DJ, but if people haven't heard of you, why are they going to come and see you? That would be the logic that a promoter, I suppose, would use. What I always like DJ-wise, if I'm going out, is people who are eclectic, I suppose. I'm not interested generally in going out and hearing 4 hours of the same sort of music. So I guess, and a lot of the DJs who are a bit more eclectic tend to be a bit older. I mean, I like Giles Peterson as a DJ. I like Tony Humphries as a DJ, because I know that I'll hear music I haven't heard before. So I don't want to hear lots of stuff I already know. I like to hear new music. And I also like to hear someone playing maybe some very gospel-y garage track and then something slightly more techno-y afterwards. I don't want to hear just stuff that is very samey sounding. So that's generally what I like to hear when I go out. And I suppose I'm not necessarily going to be on the dance floor for all of the night, but I will be listening to the music, you know. So maybe I'm not. I know that if I'm DJing, I'm often looking at the dance floor, saying, "Are people enjoying this?" And it's a difficult one, because you know you don't have to necessarily be in the middle of the dance floor with your arms in the air to be appreciating what's going on. So that's when you're DJing, the barometer of sort of like, you know, you can't always be making people go crazy. So I think I'm conscious when I'm DJing. It's like I know that sometimes I'm going to bore people a little bit. But as long as I know I'm going to take it up again, to me if you've got it up in fifth gear all night, it stops actually being in fifth gear. You actually go back down, because it's relentless but lacking in dynamic. So I like someone who's prepared to take it right down. And I think you've got to, it's having a little bit of courage and taking risks. And the guy I heard last summer, and I enjoyed his set, even though I didn't like every record he played, was Theo Parrish, because he was really playing some stuff which is, by no stretch of the imagination, was dance floor music. And it's not music I would ever play, but I thought, fair enough, mate. It definitely got dynamics, and it would be some abstract electronic record, then it'd be James Brown. And I thought, well, it's interesting. For me, it's interesting. There was some girls coming to the DJ booth complaining, oh, this is rubbish and whatever, which you're always going to get if you're going to take those sort of risks. But I thought, for me, as a sort of other DJ and as a muso of house music or whatever you want to call it, I enjoyed it, you know, and I would more rather hear that in a way than just hear, you know, 3 hours of house music seamlessly mixed together, because I just thought it was a bit different. When we first started making music, I always thought, I guess I bought so many disco records and producer-led projects which had names that weren't really anything to do with the actual person who made the record, you know. So I thought it was a bit of fun thinking of names. I always enjoyed the creativity of sort of thinking of like a name for an act. Though often when it actually came, if I'm put under pressure to think, if you said you've got to think of a name sort of like for an act this afternoon, sometimes it's not so easy. It's more you come up with it when you're on a train or somewhere when it's not required, like all these things. But so the first record, the MDM thing, that was just our initials. It was myself, another guy called Mike, and a guy called Mark Ryder. So the three of us together, and he was like the scratch DJ, Mark. As I got further into it, I always thought Dave Lee was a boring name, to be honest with you. And I thought, would I buy a record by Dave Lee? I mean, I would have to have heard it first. I definitely wouldn't it wouldn't be one of those when I'm in a junk shop and I'm looking through records, I wouldn't think, well, that looks interesting, Dave Lee. So I always thought, well, let me think of some name which maybe has got half a chance of people saying, oh, what's that one like? You know, if it's on the wall of a record shop. And I had a record out by Raven Mays in 1989. And I like that name, Raven Mays. And I was planning to use that again. I'd done that as a scam, so I'd licensed it to this bona fide label called Quark, who were quite a popular garage label. They'd had people like Blaze and other US producers. It was quite a cool label. And I'd done this track which sampled an old sort of New York classic that was generally a fairly unknown record to most people at that point by Exodus, called Together Forever. And I thought, why don't I license this to this Quark label, and we think up of a funny name, which was Raven Mays, and let it come over as an import and let people think it's American. So we did that, and I actually started doing quite well. So we had to come up with a press photo. So I had an old album by The Reflections, and we cut out a picture of one of the guys who had mirror sunglasses on and an afro. and we used that as a press photo. I think the guy from who did our artwork put a New York skyline behind it, and it got printed in Record Mirror in lots of other places, and I thought, oh, this is great, this is actually quite a lot of fun, because I thought people are gonna, because a few people knew it was me, and I thought, you know, someone's gonna blab and whatever, but no one did, and we made up this ridiculous story in the press sheet about him being an ex-con. He was in prison, so he used to play in a steel band in Disneyland and whatever, and it was so that I thought, well, this is a more fun way of doing it than if I do, and I thought it worked on the inverted snobbery, and it was an interesting story, and people printed it. So I did another record about a year later, which I thought I'd do the same thing again, but with a different label and a different name. I thought it was fun. I did it once. People won't expect me to do it a second time. So, and this I licensed to a label called New Groove. Again, with a cool label. I had early Kenny Dope and Burrell Brothers and whatever. I thought that's the cool label at the moment.